Hey everyone, and welcome to this explainer. I am absolutely pumped you're tuning in today because honestly, we're looking at something incredibly fascinating. We are diving into a massive collection of crowdsourced data to answer a question that affects pretty much every single one of us at some point. What exactly is relationship kryptonite? We're going to map out the specific hobbies, the interests, and the daily occupations that, according to thousands of real people sharing their actual lived experiences, lead to a divorce or breakup rate that approaches almost 100%. It's a wry, kind of humorous, but honestly deeply empathetic look at the hidden costs of the paths we choose in life. So let me just ask you right out of the gate, what do you think is the single fastest way to guarantee a breakup? I mean, if you had to guess, you might immediately jump to, a massive betrayal, or maybe a fundamental difference in core values, or even one of those huge cinematic arguments in the pouring rain. But I promise you, the internet's crowdsourced answer isn't a massive dramatic betrayal at all. Actually, it is a highly specific, incredibly mundane task that most of us don't even think twice about until we are literally right in the middle of it.
Okay, get this. It's backing up an RV in the dark. I know, right? But according to the data, navigating a tight campsite at night, or maybe trying to coordinate at a super busy boat ramp, causes more instant relationship doom than actual divorce court. It's what we call a micro stressor, but it acts like a massive pressure cooker. Think about it. You're tired, visibility is absolute zero, and you are relying entirely on the frantic, confusing hand gestures of your partner, who is standing just barely out of view in your rearview mirror. And the anatomy of these microstressors always breaks down in three brutal, predictable steps. Step 1, go left. Step 2, no, your other left. And step 3, total, deafening silence. It's funny for sure, but it brilliantly illustrates a complete and total breakdown of communication. In just those few minutes, a couple experiences a rapid-fire version of the exact same poor communication, intense frustration, and lack of teamwork that causes long-term relationship strains. Look, if you can't navigate a pine tree at midnight, navigating a 30-year mortgage together is going to be a whole lot harder. Now, if an evening of frustration in an RV is a microstressor, let's flip over to the complete opposite end of the spectrum. Enter the time thieves. These are the pursuits that don't just steal an evening, they steal months, sometimes literally years of your time. And looking at the data, it specifically and repeatedly calls out grueling athletic pursuits, with Ironman training sitting right at the very top of the list. Because here's the thing, achieving competitive Ironman status isn't just a weekend hobby. It is basically a secondary, unpaid full-time job. You really have to weigh the reality of Ironman training versus being a present partner. It requires such an immense time sink, we're talking hours of swimming, biking, and running every single day, that there is simply no energy left for a spouse. One commenter actually shared this incredibly poignant story about their own dad, who had to abandon the sport entirely despite absolutely loving it, just to save his marriage and actually remain a present father and husband. And we see that exact same dynamic when we look at the career equivalents of stolen time, like medical school and residencies. To put this into perspective, the data shows a pretty stark reality. It is incredibly rare for couples who enter that grueling medical journey already married to actually make it out the other side together. The sheer volume of studying, the impossible back-to-back shifts, the extreme sleep deprivation, it just completely consumes one partner. That leaves the other one completely stranded on the sidelines of a relationship that basically gets put on pause for an entire decade. But this kind of exhaustion definitely isn't limited to medicine. The data smoothly bridges us over into other exhausting time-draining careers, like being a general construction superintendent for massive commercial projects. The volume of work, the constant daily crisis management, and those brutally early mornings just leave absolutely zero in the emotional tank. By the time they finally get home, they're often just a shell of a person, with nothing left to offer a spouse who has literally been waiting all day for some kind of connection. And that brings us to a really crucial question. We've talked about the exhaustion of stolen time, where you are physically home but totally, completely drained. But what happens when you aren't just tired, you're physically gone? Like, how does a relationship even survive when the absolute core ingredient, physical presence, is completely removed from the equation? Well, in the aviation industry, the strain of travel is so universally acknowledged that pilots and flight attendants actually use a dark humor acronym to describe their inevitable fate: aviation-induced divorce syndrome. The constant time zone jumps, the never-ending layovers, the whole life lived out of a rolling suitcase. It takes a massive, undeniable toll on marriages. And the wild part? They know these risks the exact moment they get their wings. It's the exact same story for all of what we call the distance jobs.
Think about long-haul trucking, maritime and offshore drilling, or even touring musicians. These roles leave one partner completely isolated out at sea or on a lonely highway for weeks. Meanwhile, the partner back home, they're forced to adapt. They literally have to learn to run the entire household all by themselves. So by the time the traveling partner finally returns, completely exhausted and just wanting to rest, they end up disrupting a household that has learned to function perfectly well without them. And that leads to deep, hidden resentments on both sides. Now let this statistic land for a second. 76%. According to the crowdsourced data, this is the staggering divorce rate for Navy SEALs. The combination of intense secrecy, extreme physical demands, and those extended deployments away from home creates a pressure cooker that very, very few marriages can survive. It's a figure so high and honestly so well known that it actively deters a lot of highly capable people from even attempting to join the elite force in the first place. So, if military and maritime jobs are all about private isolation, let's shift gears to the exact opposite: intense, unrelenting public scrutiny. A successful, long-term Hollywood marriage is literally viewed by industry insiders as a mythical creature, a Hollywood unicorn. The combination of massive wealth, constant temptation everywhere you look, and the relentless flash of paparazzi cameras makes staying grounded and connected almost impossible. We see this vividly in the broader live entertainment industry too, where the boundary between personal life and professional life simply doesn't exist. You have constantly shifting gigs, you're working super odd hours in incredibly close physical proximity to your colleagues, and you are sharing intense emotional highs and lows with them. It just becomes impossible to turn work off. And that blurred line, it absolutely destroys relationships with partners who exist outside of that very specific, chaotic bubble. But hey, if you want to actively accelerate that destruction, the data is pretty clear. Just invite cameras right into your living room. Joining a reality TV show like The Real Housewives, for example, essentially guarantees the end of a marriage. Whatever tiny microscopic cracks existed in the foundation of the relationship are ruthlessly pried wide open for public consumption and drama. The public scrutiny completely fractures whatever foundation was left. From public scrutiny, we transition into radical behavioral shifts. Multiple people in the data pointed out a highly specific phenomenon that I found fascinating: going to Burning Man without your spouse. It is observed over and over again in the data as a literal speed run to divorce. Entering an environment built entirely around radical self-expression and throwing off all societal norms while leaving your partner at home almost guarantees that you are going to return as a completely different person than the one who left. Which naturally brings us to the fascinating and honestly often misunderstood concept of opening up a struggling relationship. Now, while polyamory absolutely works for a specific subset of people who build their relationships on it from day one, the data here highlights a completely different scenario. It highlights forced polyamory as a panicked, last-ditch effort to save a failing relationship rather than a genuine, enthusiastic lifestyle choice. The brutal truth is this: when a couple is fundamentally struggling, initiating the conversation to open up the relationship is about 95% identical to just asking for a breakup. It is almost always driven by a profound fear. A fear of the financial fallout, the emotional pain, and the social awkwardness of officially splitting up. It's basically a way of slowly backing out of the door while pretending you are still in the room. And speaking of financial fallout, we absolutely cannot talk about relationship kryptonite without gliding right into the destructive power of severe vices, specifically gambling. The data is full of chilling realities on this one. Just imagine the pure shock of waking up to find drained bank accounts, knowing that in a single night of chasing losses, $10,000 and decades of family trust have been completely wiped out. It is an addiction that erodes the very safety and security that a marriage is supposed to provide. As we start to bring this analysis toward its conclusion, we really have to look at the ultimate irony revealed in the data. Divorce attorneys themselves suffer from massive divorce rates. Think about it. They spend all day, every day, waist-deep in the most toxic, bitter ends of human connection, and that inevitably bleeds right into their own homes. Though, as one very wry commenter pointed out, the one upside is they certainly get to meet a lot of newly single people. So, the really crucial point here is that relationship destruction can hide in the most unexpected places. Take physics PhDs, for example. It's a surprisingly specific final example from the data, but the intense, isolating obsession required to literally master the universe often breaks homes. In fact, it is so common that Amazon's algorithm literally recommends self-help books on surviving divorce to people who purchase heavy, high-level quantum mechanics textbooks. The algorithm literally sees the heartbreak before the couple does. How wild is that?
Which leaves us with this final, vital thought. We've seen how grueling jobs, intense hobbies, and radical life shifts can act as absolute kryptonite. So, when life, work, and your personal passions are actively pulling you apart, what actually keeps you together? What is the anchor in your own life? It's something to deeply reflect on as you navigate the hidden costs of the incredible paths you choose to pursue. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and I really hope this gave you a whole new perspective to think about.